It is so powerful to see all of us gathered throughout these High Holy Day services. During these gatherings, when we all stand for a prayer, we can imagine ourselves standing with our ancestors who all stood together at Sinai to receive God's commandments. Imagine that Sinai moment with me. What exactly did they hear? Some say that every single person heard all 613 commandments. And some say that they heard the 10 commandments. Still others say that everyone heard only the first commandment. Anochi, I, the Eternal, am your God. One teaching, which I am going to focus on tonight, imagines that each person standing at Mount Sinai heard only the letter Aleph. Now, the Aleph is the first letter of the first of the 10 commandments. So they heard the Aleph, but the Aleph has no sound. The Aleph is silent. Imagine what a mystical moment that must have been. Rabbi Kushner shares a Hasidic teaching that the Hebrew character Aleph itself is constructed of two other Hebrew letters, a diagonal Vav and two Yuds, Aleph. Rabbi Horowitz of Ropsich taught, Adonai, God's name, starts with Aleph. This, he says, hints at the face of a human being. What does that mean? Well, the two eyes resemble two-letter Yuds, and the nose is a Vav. In other words, on every human face, there is a letter Aleph, which stands for God's name. When we gaze into someone's countenance, when we see their punim, whether the face of someone we love or someone who upsets us, Jewish tradition teaches us how to see the face of God. How easy it is to see the divine in the faces of those we love. Seeing God's face in someone who makes us feel uncomfortable, this is one of the greatest lessons we can learn in the Torah. Remember the drama between the twins Esau and Jacob? The two brothers had been estranged for years. Then they grew up. Jacob wanted to come home, and to do so, he had no choice but to see his brother. So what does Jacob say when after all these years and after all the fear, he finally faces his brother? He's silent for a moment, just like the silence at Mount Sinai when we all heard the Aleph. Then he looks at his brother and he says, to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Can you imagine being able to look into the face of an adversary or even just someone who unsettles us and to see the special spark in them? You don't even have to believe in God for this idea to become a transformative practice in your life. But it can be difficult and it can be painful. We can recognize what arises for us, fear, judgment, shame, but work to not allow those forces to rule us. We all possess an inner critic, and it's good to sometimes challenge that voice from within that tells us to avoid people who are different than us. I know this from my own experience. The day I started middle school, I recoiled and backed away from a deaf girl who was trying to befriend me. In that moment, I did not see the face of God in her. All I saw were her differences. I feel like I, of all people, should have known better. I wish I had challenged my inner critic at that moment because, as so many of you know, I grew up with a sister with a stigma of mental illness. In childhood, my sister Lori was treated like a pariah everywhere we went, including our temple. She lives with schizophrenia, bipolar disease, and paranoia. When you look into her face, you see the mental illness right away. You can also see the two yuds and the vav. Yet growing up, too few people saw the face of God in Lori. Most only saw that she was different. If you have experienced anything like this yourself or in your family, you know what I mean when I tell you how painful that was for Lori, for me, for our family, for any of us. It could be a family member with mental illness like my sister, or really any perceived difference, any otherness. Difference could be a family member with an addiction, with a non-binary gender identity, an LGBT family member, a learning difference, a difficult marriage, a divorce, a medical condition, domestic abuse. Or it could be one of our high school kids who's not going to college, or a family member who is socially awkward. These are just a few examples. The tendency of our culture is to respond to all of these differences with the silence of an aleph. But the Torah feeds our inner critic with an alternate response to silence. It's just one word, and it's in the story we will read tomorrow on Rosh Hashanah morning about Abraham and the binding of Isaac. Whenever called upon, Abraham always responds, Hineni, which means, here I am. This can be our takeaway on this new year, 5779. But it's not an easy takeaway. Looking past difference is so hard. We are easily overcome by embarrassment, shame, or fear. Yet these spiritual teachings of our tradition invite us to look into each face, those we recognize with love, and those who make us feel uncomfortable because they are different. Look for that yud, vav, and respond, Hineni, here I am. I see you, and I see the face of God. When I have written about my sister's mental illness, many of you have emailed me or spoken to me privately, detailing a mental or emotional illness and its impact on you or your family. Now, some of us are very private, and we always want to respect an individual's privacy. But we need to balance privacy with creating community space here at Temple where it's not only okay, but healthy and healing to share something personal. This summer, I visited with one of my dearest friends on the East Coast. Somehow, in the most casual way, he mentioned to me that his young son lives with an anxiety disorder. For a moment, I felt shock that I was just hearing this now. I had known this kid forever. But then I stopped. You know, my younger daughter has struggled with anxiety since high school. And I have never shared that with this friend or anyone else for that matter. In fact, it's something I rarely talk about, even with all of you. Why? At first, I myself did not believe or understand my daughter, who's so accomplished, would have this problem. And maybe I felt some shame that something about my parenting was to blame. Everyone else's kids seemed fine, so what was wrong with me and what was wrong with my kid? Better to keep this to myself. So I understand our human tendencies to keep things hush-hush. But is keeping all of this to ourselves working? The suicides of public figures shook many of us to the core this past year. Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, among others, ended their lives. I heard from so many of you about these terrible losses. It really didn't matter if they were Jewish or not. Each one had a private or semi-public struggle with depression. However depressed we thought we knew they were, we had no idea. Almost 50,000 Americans die by suicide each year. Suicide rates for teens keep climbing. That's why naming a stigma can be a matter of life or death. The great writer William Styrone compared the agony of mental illness to that of a heart attack. Pain is pain, whether it is of the mind or the spirit, or the body. So why, he asked, were depressed people treated as pariahs? Imagine if instead we infuse the silence with the sound of our voices saying, Hineni, let's talk about it. Let's hear people's stories of living with mental illness, with the stigma of mental illness right here in Temple. What if we were to talk openly about our new mayor's controversial ideas about moving mentally ill people off the streets to a place where they can get real help? Imagine if we partnered with JFCS, Jewish Family and Children's Services, and others, and made mental illness awareness an annual part of our teen curriculum. Imagine if our kids didn't only feel that clergy are for bar and bat mitzvah, but came to us throughout their development to share their struggles. Rabbi Alan Liu of blessed memory has a wonderful book I think we all should have. It's called This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. In it, he recalls that Sigmund Freud introduced the single great idea that the invisible is more important than the visible. I think about everyone carrying a secret pain of any kind. We could make the invisible visible. A few months ago, a friend and I were catching up. She told me that her 8th grade son was on his class trip to Israel. Her son is so smart, but he often stands on the edges of peer groups. I told her about the 8th grade groups that Rabbi Rodich and Ariana and I take each year from Emanu-El to Los Angeles, the famed 8th grade Disney trip. I noted that sometimes there are a couple students who stand on the edges of the social circle pretending to be having a good time, but I see their wish to be part of the crowd. Then my friend told me a story I will never forget. She noted that she too was a shy and awkward kid. But here's what's amazing. She said, there was this very popular girl at my school, and for reasons I'll never understand, she saw me and felt I would be a valuable part of her group. When she pulled me in, other kids started to treat me differently, all because of that one girl. Some of us need to be pulled in. And sometimes we forget that we have the power to pull others in, to be the one who sees God's face in each person. These stories, these stigmas are challenging. If you are a parent who feels that your child is socially isolated, that hurts. If you feel like you can't let other people know about your addiction, that's isolating. If you have a hard time with mentally ill people or are impacted by mental illness in your family, you are not alone. But I tell you, picking up that practice of looking for the holy in each person, that's a starting place on this first day of the new year. Remember that midrash about all of us standing at Sinai and hearing the silent Aleph? Here's a way to help you remember. I brought a prop. Our talented artist, Sandy Cohen-Wynn, hung some beautiful new banners in the Martin Meyer Sanctuary that you'll see next time you're in there. Every time you go there, you can look for this Aleph hanging in that sanctuary. Yud, Yud, Vav, eyes, nose. Think about the person who distresses you. Look for this Aleph. Look for that special spark on their face. We all stood together at Sinai. We quieted for just a moment to tune into something silent and invisible. It's the feeling we feel when we feel excluded. You hear no sound. You feel invisible. It's the feeling we feel when we exclude. But it's also the feeling and the presence of God when you say, Hineni, here I am. That's the sound. It's the sound of silence, and it's the sound of the sacred in each of us. The new year is here. We say, Hineni, here I am. I see you, and I see the face of God. Sometimes we feel invisible, but at moments like this, we remember that we are part of something so much greater than ourselves. We turn to one another and we say, to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Shana Tova, may it be a sweet year.